Hey everybody, Mr. Rubo here. Today we're going to talk about solving quadratics, but this time using the square root method. So for this one, it's really going to be if they are in a specific form that we'd want to do this. So this is going to be where there's no x term, just x. There's going to be an x squared term, or x in parentheses being squared. So like this right here, if we saw something like this, x squared equals 4, we can use the square root method because there's an x squared term, there's no x term. Okay? So square root method is what it sounds like. We're going to take the square root of both sides. But the thing to remember when we take the square root is we want to make sure we throw in that plus or minus. So this ends up just being x equals, and then it would be plus or minus the square root of 4, which is 2. So there's our two answers. Okay? That one was a simple one. And you guys probably could have even just told me what the answer was without doing much work. So now let's see where square root method is really helpful. So when we have something like x plus 2 squared equals 48, all right, so now the problem with this is if you try to multiply this out and put it into standard form, it really won't factor well. So we wouldn't be able to factor. Quadratic formula is always an option, but once again, you have to put it in standard form. So the thing to notice here is that you don't have an x term, right? This thing that's with x is all being squared. So if we were to multiply it out, we would end up with an x term, but because it's written like this, we actually can go right into using the square root method. If we needed to, we would isolate this first. So if the 48 was on this side, we would add the 48 to both sides to move it over here. And now you square root both sides, just like we did in the last problem. So we'd end up with x plus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 48. We will simplify a little bit, but before we do that, I'm going to save that for the end. We could simplify it here, but it's not a perfect square, so we're still going to end up with a root. All right, and then our last step before we simplify the root is to subtract the 2. So we're going to get x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 48, and then I'm going to simplify that. Now, one thing before I simplify that, this plus or minus is always going to go in front of the root. Okay, it's always going to be there because that's what when we take this square root, we're square rooting the plus or minus. Don't get the minus 2 mixed up with it. You either put the minus 2 out in front and then plus or minus square root of 48, or you could put the minus 2 at the very end, but make sure the square root stops at the 48. All right, so now the last thing we want to do is simplify our root. Different ways of going about it. The way that I think is quickest, if you can remember a perfect square that goes into this, it's really helpful. So 16 is 1. So 16 times 3 is 48. We're doing the square root of both. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 3 we can't simplify. So square root of 48 simplifies to 4 root 3. The plus or minus is out in front of those. So it's out in front of the 4 this time because the 4 was part of the root. But then the negative 2 is there. So there's our two answers. X equals negative 2 plus or minus 4 root 3. If we wanted to, we could split it up. Sometimes it's helpful to, but sometimes it's not. So negative 2 plus 4 root 3. And then the other answer would be negative 2 minus 4 root 3. Either way you write it is correct. Obviously, the plus or minus just requires less writing. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good day.